So food and Jews, like what is up with that? Like that is such a thing. It is a thing from the get-go. It is a thing from the very first chapter in the Torah, right? That the culmination of the creation of the human being ends with the line that says, "And here's what you can eat." It says it right there in the Holy Torah. So, out of the starting block, food and eating is something that we have paid a lot of attention to in this tradition. And that food situation goes on and expands into being the primary way that early Judaism, that temple Judaism, actually connected with the divine was through food and through performance. And Passover continues that. Passover is, if nothing else, it is a food performance extraordinaire that continues to be evolved and transformed. And we are so grateful and excited to have somebody who is bringing together performance and food in an amazing way, and Jewish identity, and we've just got so much to talk about once we bring Jake on. Before we do that, though, we just want to make a special, take a moment to offer our gratitude to Toby Philanthropies, to the Rodin Family Foundation, the Levinsky Family Foundation, and its philanthropic partnership initiative that is called Strengthening Jewish Engagement for Bay Area Young Adults. And of course, the Jewish Community Federation and our community partners, Omnivore Booksellers and One Table. Amen. So let's just do a little love to all of those organizations that make it possible for us to be continuing to do this kind of programming. And without further ado, I just want to bring in Mr. Jake Cohen so that we can get this show on the road. He's amazing. He's young. He's driving it. He's got background. He's got foreground. He's got middle ground. And tonight we're just going to cut loose and let him do his stuff on a twist of a Passover food in a new and fresh and beautiful way. Jake, come on down.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. It's a late night in New York, so I love some sweets at any time of day, but especially like this time, it's perfect time to be indulging.
Beautiful. Time for dessert, right?
Yeah.
I loved your little quip from desert to dessert. So I think we're right in line with that. So awesome. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you're making?
Today we are doing tiramisu, kind of a play on tiramisu. Obviously, instead of like dry ladyfingers, what's another thing that is dry and needs to be soaked before it's edible? Matzah. So I layer matzah. It's very, I mean, you could also pretty much serve this at Shavuos because it's just very dairy heavy, but you make a really delicious like custard with whipped cream, and then we're layering it with coffee soaked matzah. It's like the perfect K for P dessert that you can also do like with gluten-free matzah if you're gluten-free. And it's like just something that's not supposed to be cake. And everyone's always trying to like turn cakes into something that's K for P when it's just like you're not gonna, you just gotta let it go. So instead, finding desserts like this that are just like perfect and sweet ways to end your Seder without going crazy with the meringue.
Awesome. I love that you said, matzah, you got to do something to make it edible. I think that was your direct quote. So, and what you're talking about is actually an old culinary tradition called gebrachts. Do you know about gebrachts? Have you got?
No, but
Okay,
it
awesome. I
enlightened
guess
me.
I get to give you something then. That's great. That's
Yes.
exciting. So, gebrachts is a whole range of foods that it's contested because it's Jewish. So you have to have some people saying yes to gebrats and some say no, absolutely never gebrats. Gebrats, I mean, literally in Yiddish, it means to be broken. But it's exactly what you just talked about. It is taking that matzah that is so dry and, it's not pleasant. Some people say, that's right, it's not pleasant. That's what this whole thing is
That's the
about.
point.
It's
Yeah.
supposed to be not pleasant. How dare you make it pleasant? And others who are like, ugh, it's so unpleasant. Why would anybody find any joy in this story if what we do is just afflict ourselves? So you have that tension, and gebracht is the solution to that tension, which is broken and wettened matzah. I apparently there's some restaurants in Israel where if you want to put your matzah crackers in your soup during Pesach, they ask that you ask for a special bowl for that because it's gotten to the crazy level of gebrocks now will trafe up, will is now considered like chametz, is considered like bread. So there are some folks, right?
I am of the belief, and in the same way, there is the tradition that you make the little sandwich with charoset and maror on matzah. And I think one of the beautiful motifs of Passover and Seder is this idea that sweet things are sweeter when layered over bitterness, in the same way that our freedom is sweeter when layered over our history in bondage. So there's no issue in enjoying a delicious K4P dessert if you've put in the time and energy to have a meaningful Seder.
Love that. Love that. And this is like kind of a tension that exists in this holiday. The tension between exactly what you're talking about, the bitterness, the tears, the hardship, the remembering of all of those things, as well as the connection to the divine, if you will, the sense of liberation, the sense of freedom, that incredible idea of finding a liberatory way through those narrow places. So, and hopefully, when you get to the end of that tight place, you find something as beautiful as what you're describing with the dessert. So, with that backdrop, let's go because I think we're both on the Gebrox train. So,
Amazing.
so
Um,
let's do it.
So I just threw on a counter cam just so everyone can see my face and see what's happening. I've done so many of these now, and the number one, it's like everyone on Zoom, and especially like I think of my mother even just sending an email, let alone being on Zoom. So we want to make sure they're angles. We're going to start on a double boiler. If you've never played with double boiler before, all it is any type of saucepan with a little bit of water, just about an inch. And we're going to put this over and just bring it up to a little steam. And we're going to use steam completely to heat this. The whole idea is that it's just going to be like lower and slower and gentler because we're working with egg yolks, and we're going to be making a sabayon or zabiglione, depending on what language you speak. And this is just like traditional custard that's whipped with some type of like sweet wine. So oftentimes you find it with marsala. Since this is tiramisu, I'm using Kahlua, so coffee liqueur. You could use anything you like that's sweet. You could also just, if let's say you didn't want to add any alcohol, you could just use a little bit of coffee syrup or just like coffee and call it a day. I'm just gonna add in a little more, 2 tablespoons of that, half a cup of sugar, and we're just gonna whisk this up for 6 to 8 minutes until it is light and fluffy, and you are going to see it like it's gonna turn from this little orange gloop into something that is like pale yellow, light, voluptuous, and then we're gonna go on. But now is a great time. As I just whisk, we can chat and keep it going.
Awesome. So I was mentioning earlier, I don't know if you caught in the intro, the notion that food and performance have gone together for a long, long time in Judaism, and that like so right, like the priesthood, they were chefs, right? I mean, basically they were performing a sacred barbecue. They were out there literally from snout to tail, butchering, cooking, offering, apportioning, and that's how people worshipped. And here we are now, and I love your story. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your relationship with One Table and sort of discovering a ritual aspect to your Jewish identity. And, and you're, like you said, you've been doing a zillion of these things. Like performance and food kind of go together. Um, and so I would just love to hear you riff a little bit about how do you like, are you a modern day like priest or, right? Like, are you stepping into, are you a Cohen? So maybe maybe you're like just updating the whole Kohanim kind of situation. So I'd love to hear you
Yeah,
riff on like, how does it work for you as a chef, as a performer, as a Jew? How do those identities come together?
you put it really well. Actually, I haven't thought about it in it like that really, but really, yes, you're 100% right. I relate to Jewish ritual in a way. And it's funny because a lot of my friends refer to me as a rabbi. Like they'll call me Rabbi Jake, even though it's like I'm not a rabbi, I'm not doing anything like that. But I think it's that modern connection to ritual. And I think any type of ritual, especially if it's tied to Judaism, is automatically assumed like, oh, you must be a rabbi or truly have this deeper connection to it. And for me, it's always surrounded food. I talk about this in the book. I was a high holiday Jew, very secular family, two Seders, Rosh Hashanah, you go to temple for Kol Nidre and then Erev Rosh Hashanah, and then you're done. My mother like gets angry at me because I say that we didn't grow up having Shabbat. She's like, we had the Shabbat and I baked the round challah. We would maybe do like one Shabbat a year around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur when everyone's like, okay, we got to be Jewish. So it was just never a huge part of our life past these like rituals that really were. And when I met my husband, he is who's walking in the door right now. He is Persian Iraqi Jewish, and I'm Ashkenazi from New York. And our definitions of Jewish food were completely different. And when you look at secular Jews, what's the one thing that we have that we hold on to with dear life? It's food culture. So as we started to explore what Jewish food meant to us, how it was different, how we were going to share it. We were also trying to build community in New York, which was very difficult. We didn't have a ton of friends. We didn't have a ton of queer friends. And I ended up hearing about One Table, incredible nonprofit focused on getting people in their 20s and 30s to find an accessible and sustainable Shabbat practice. And we started hosting. And it was immediate, like in the sense of we'd been trying some shuls and congregations, and it wasn't just clicking. With One Table, it was just like, this is it. Hosting Shabbat, that idea of creating a space in which we were breaking bread with others, disconnecting from the craziness of the city and our lives and all of that, all around a meal. And I think it was this space in which I was finally able to like cook a lot of the Ashkenazi dishes I grew up with, but I never actually made. You think of like, you're in New York, you get matzo ball soup everywhere. Like most Jews in New York don't make matzo ball soup because there's great matzo ball soup. There are a million and one options that you can get great matzo ball soup. And likewise with this opportunity where I really got to start to explore and learn the dishes that my husband grew up eating. So it was this really, really, really great space for creating this relationship with ritual. And obviously I've stuck with it in terms of One Table. I'm now on their board of directors, and just always I'm preaching the gospel in that sense when it comes to Shabbat. But a huge part of it is what One Table did for me that I try to do for others is they took away the prescription around Judaism of like what you have to do, what it needs to be, and also like explaining the why of what we do everything. Any Hebrew school educated Jew like myself will tell you with verbatim, no matter what age, no matter how long it's been since they've practiced, the prayers for the candles, the wine, and the challah. Everyone knows that. Everyone remembers that. Like, I never knew why we did any of those things. Most people don't know why we do it, what the candles represent, what the wine represents, what the challah represents. And once you understand that, it becomes so much deeper and it becomes so much more beautiful in the sense of like, I think of like Lab Shul in New York with Rabbi Amichai, who it's like it's a God optional temple. And one of the things that you start to realize is like even something with these rituals of the candles prayer, the candles, wine, and challah, like if you did them without saying a prayer in Hebrew, they would still be just as special. If you'd like, I say the prayers just because my mother loves that and I think it's great for the tradition. But for me, I think getting that deeper connection to the why of all of these rituals is what makes it sustainable and gives us also that opportunity to modernize it. It make it fit for our lives, which is something that's very important to me. I'm not kosher. I'm not any of these things. I'm just Jewish.
Totally. I wanted to quick pop in that somebody in the chat asked, what is the book that Jake is referencing? I think it's this book. I'm pretty sure this is the one you're referencing. So Jake just released his first cookbook, and we're celebrating that. This recipe is in the cookbook. So if you're psyched about this recipe, don't freak out. You don't have to write everything down from the chat. You can order the book. So it's called Jew-ish. great stories, great recipes, great photos. I think you're gonna, if you love this, you're gonna love that. I wanted to share something with you, Jake. It just came over my desk this morning, and apparently that there's been a project that was done through NYU and Bronfman called the 18 by 18 framework. And it's this recommendation for 18 Jewish things a young Jew should know, care about, and be able to do by age 18. And you will be happy to know that number 17 is partake in Jewish culinary traditions.
Mhm.
And that really struck me. I was glad to see that because I think you're exactly right. Not only is there's richness to food traditions, gastronomic traditions in Judaism. There are also ways in which the gastronomic traditions have actually preserved Jewish identity through difficult times, through times when being an out Jew was as dangerous as it is to be an out queer person today, or more so, even. Um, and there's ways in which a lot of times knowing the backstory is really interesting. My daughter is a food researcher and has done a bunch of research on Yiddish cookbooks from the mid 19th century. And when Jews came here in the mid 19th century to the late 19th century, they often shed their Jewishness as it had been worn in Europe,
Hmm.
but they did not shed how their bubby made borscht. And you
Yeah.
will see things in these recipes that say things like, before you start, take boiling water and rinse the bowl out. So 2 generations away, they think that's part of the recipe. You have to do that. They don't understand you're koshering the freaking bowl is what you're doing. And why are
Yeah.
you koshering the bowl? And why did kashrut come? Jewish dietary laws end up being understood in this way, that way, or the other way. The deeper you go, the you find troves of information there. Um, and I totally get like what you're saying about if you know a little bit about Jewish ritual and you can hold it for others, you become their rabbi.
Yeah.
And I wonder for you, like, how did that feel? Like, does that feel like a responsibility? Does it feel like scary? Does it feel like exciting? Do you love it? You feel like, no, 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 rabbi. I mean, I'd love to know like how you hold that.
All
And
of the
just
above is the answer. And I'm just
always a
gonna,
good answer.
as we're doing this, I'm walking and talking and chewing gum at the same time. This
Great.
is now nice and like luscious, and you typically go for like as long as you can pick up and make these ribbons, and you can like even just write your name. It'll hold for like a half second. That's how you know you've gotten it thick enough. And I'm gonna whisk in some mascarpone and talk about this responsibility. So it's amazing. I will say it's something that I didn't intend on. It's something that just happened. And I think there's something really beautiful. There's something really important. And I think a lot of it comes down to what I find our generation, my generation's responsibility, given the blessings that we've had from being raised in America. I think of my grandmother, who was a hidden child. So much of my family had to flee from country to country. My mother-in-law, who had to flee Iran during the revolution. Her parents, who had to flee Iraq from the Farhud. All of these terrible travesties, and the way that food and culture survived and made its way from country to country to here. And I do think that like the least we can be doing is making sure that we know the stories, the recipes. One thing that came up with my grandmother, I'm just whisking in a cup of mascarpone right into the sabayon. Um, my mother had never heard of cholent, and I hadn't either until I started studying Jewish food, and I started making it. My mother had no idea what it was, and it's kind of just made me want to like. I called my grandmother. And I was like, "Hey, like, why did you have cholent growing up? I never heard of it. Mom had never heard of it." And she was like, "Yeah, my mother made cholent all the time." And I was like, why didn't you ever make it? And she's like, oh, well, when I met your grandfather, I stopped being kosher. He was a secular Jew. So there was no need to make cholent. And to me, like, I think that our generation, I think one generation away or two generations away, any distance from Judaism in terms of practice meant like you had to step away from all of it versus this generation where I believe that like, that's great. You don't want to be kosher anymore. I mean, great, don't be kosher. I'm not kosher. But to like keep then cholent from your children and your grandchildren and have it be that hard stop in this tradition, to me, that is not okay. Um,
Yeah, I
but
mean,
yeah, I think,
you're describing a kind of healing.
yeah. And listen, it is a lot. It's emotional. I think this book, I didn't intend for anything. I mean, no, I did. I intended, like, I had a vision. The world did not. My publisher didn't expect it to do so well. No one expected a Jewish book is a niche market thing. It's never anything that people expect to do well. And I decided that no, this is going to be the whole world's going to be celebrating Jewish food. And to me, it's big. Like the book just hit the Times list last week, and it's not something that like we were going through, and we can't say for sure, and we're trying to do research, but like there might never have been a Jewish cookbook to ever make the list before. If there is, maybe Joe Nathan made it once, and all of this stuff, but like that's wild. That's just crazy. And it's this idea of, it's not just like me, it's not just this book, it's like the Jews. It's good for the Jews that there are these, that we're celebrating culture in ways, however it is, it's like, it's great. And to me, that is that like responsibility of what I'm doing, the importance behind it, and why I want to keep doing it.
Beautiful. It's exciting, you know. It's exciting to get that story out there and to have some sense that what you're doing is it's got it's got a lot of relevance. And I think, you know, we're dealing right now in our country with a reckoning of minority identities and identities of folks who have been shunted to the sides. And I mean, I'm so grateful that you're so open about being gay, that you're so open about being Jewish, and I think like we just have to show up, right? Like we
Yeah.
just have to show up with whatever it is that we have to contribute. And so I had some questions about that too, also for you, of
Yeah.
like the intersection, if we can be so bold as to use that language here, of your gay identity and your Jewish identity. I mean, you speak about it a bit in the book, um, of that your awareness of yourself as a gay man preceded your like deep awareness of yourself as not just a Jewish person, but like I'm a Jew. Like
Yeah.
this means something. This is not just like whatever, but it really means something. And now you're so consciously, and your awareness is, from what I can tell of our conversations and in what's in the book, has lit up around those two identities coming together. And I wonder how they inform each other.
Yeah. I mean, my whole entryway to Judaism in terms of community building was focused on building a queer Jewish community because, I mean, again, I always wanted it to be inclusive and anyone, and I love having Gentiles at the table, especially when it's their first Shabbat. That's always magical. But there was something really important to find people to see yourself represented at the table. In the same way of like, I think of like, Call Me by Your Name, which is probably the first time that I saw myself represented in media, in the sense of a queer person who's Jewish, who is not going through the travesties and traumas of coming to terms with sexuality. It's just being that internal coming to terms with it. And likewise, there's really not a lot of that in the Jewish world. I think I've been making this one comparison, and it makes sense to me, and hopefully it does to others. But I just think of that homophobic uncle that someone has that says at the dinner table, it's like, oh, I'm okay with gay marriage, but why do they have to be so gay in public around me? Why can't they just save it for their home? And you have to remember, like, that's how America treats Jews. Like that's how we're all raised to see. It's like you could be Jewish, but like save it for Passover, save it for shul on a day-to-day basis. Like you're not supposed to be so Jewish. And it was always segmented for me in the sense of like Hebrew school. And then it's not until I was an adult when you start to realize like, no, like so much of how I eat, how I act, how I talk, my values around family, hospitality, being a guest, treating friends, all of it comes down to like Jewish values. And I think it just took a long time to kind of break down what was expected, and it's very emotional to see people come to that same realization.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for naming that and holding that up. Um, and anytime you need to like say, Joe's, I got to get back to my,
Yes, yes, yes.
my
Well, I'll give
meringue here.
a little update. So over here, I mixed in. We had our sabayon with the 1 cup of mascarpone, and here I just whipped up 1.5 cups of heavy cream to stiff peaks, and then we're just going to fold in the two together.
Looks good.
It is truly so easy, and just like something that's a little fancy. You might have never made a sabayon before, but it really is something that's pretty foolproof. You just got to whisk it until it's light and fluffy. And now we're just going to slowly add in the whipped cream in about thirds, just to make sure that we don't get any clumps. And we're treating this like an icebox cake. So as soon as we soak the matzah, we're going to layer this all together and pop it in the fridge, and then it's going to soak through and get nice and delicious. And you can already see this, which is getting so nice and creamy. And there are no parve substitutions for this. If you want a parve dessert, I have a delicious macaroon brownie recipe that's very easily made parve. I have these Iraqi almond cookies from my husband's family that are delicious and parve, but not tiramisu.
Yeah, Cool Whip just is not going to cover that. Not going to cover that.
Exactly.
Awesome. You know, another piece of like the phenomenon of today, the new priesthood of celebrity chefdom, and the I don't know, like I'm not a celebrity chef, but I cook a lot, and I've
Mm-hmm.
cooked professionally a lot. And I always, when I was cooking professionally, I found a schism personally between the act of intimacy and love of cooking for people that I know, and watching the whole creation go from my hands into their bodies, and the connections that are formed around that. And I think that's probably part of One Table's genius, is understanding that when we feed each other, we love each other, and that,
Yeah.
if we don't love each other, there is no Judaism, right? Like there's no nothing. There's no family, there's no mishpacha, there's no sense of connection. And so I just wonder how you carve out time in what must be an insanely busy life that's focused around food, to still have that primary impulse to love people through feeding them. And there's a lot that anyone could say about all of that, but I just throw it back to you with those kind of ideas floating in the air. What
Yeah.
your thoughts are?
I would say that now that kind of value is so instilled. How it began is I'm just an incredibly paranoid and I'm riddled with anxiety and think that nobody likes me, and I always had a difficult time making friends, and hosting people was the first way that I got people to trick people into being my friend, was hosting these dinner parties when I was in high school. And I did it again as an adult, and guess what? It worked. And it becomes addictive when you start to see the relationship that you get from extending hospitality and hosting people and cooking for people. And now it's the most important thing. I will change my whole work schedule so that Friday is empty so I can do that. And if that means, again, very busy life. So even if I can't see people X night, can't go to that event, can't go to that party, like Friday night, everyone can come over and a little bit of intention.
It's beautiful. I mean, that's the essence of Shabbos, right? Is to set that time aside. Literally, Kedusha, like the holiness of Shabbat, is not that it's better than or that it is, it's just set aside. All you have to do
Yeah,
is set something aside to make it holy.
for
That's
sure.
it.
All right,
And
let me
I
jump
love,
in here
yeah,
quickly.
go for it.
So we had this was a cup and a quarter of hot coffee with 2 tablespoons of sugar and a quarter cup of Kahlua. And I dipped in my matzah. And now I'm assembling this. Typically, I just use some type of casserole dish, but I've been making this a lot. So I have a lot of tiramisu in my fridge. So we're just going to be using a pie plate. Use whatever you got to make it fit. We soaked it a little. I put in some of the cream, which is like so luscious, like just the way that it's just like very, very velvety and airy. That's going to make our life so much easier when we chill it because it's going to get that beautiful tiramisu texture. And then we're just going to keep on going in terms of this layering. And then back to you.
Okay. I wasn't ready for you. Yeah, I was like totally watching and just getting into it. Like, it looks so satisfying to kind of layer those creamy and that crunchy all together. I love that. Beautiful. So there's a phrase. This is another little piece of kind of Jewish culture that I feel ties into to food and eating. In the Talmud, when people are arguing, which is what the Talmud is all about, it's just one argument's all the way down. When they're arguing and somebody comes forward, one of the rabbis comes forward and makes a proclamation, says, on Yom Kippur, if somebody is sick, we're going to feed him. Even though there's a fast, even though we're not supposed to eat, we're going to feed him. And there's this phrase, it comes up around any subject. I picked one that had to do with food. I didn't mean to, but there it is. Um, they'll say, "My tama." What's the reason? What reason do you give? That would be the colloquial translation, but it literally is, what flavor is that? Because a tam is a flavor, a taste. And there's this way in which food and our ability to taste and discern through taste is so sharpened, is so finely sharpened in the Jewish psyche, that they would even be in the midst of an argument and say, "Well, wait a minute, what flavor is that argument? Where'd you get that taste?" And so I wonder for you, as somebody who grew up with food being part of your Jewish identity, and now to have encountered a completely different wing of the Jewish, of the Jewish building, by marrying a man who brings Persian cuisine and then the Jewish version of Persian cuisine into your lives. Like, my tama, what flavor is this for you? Like, what's the flavor that ignites you? Is there a particular bandwidth that you love or that you want to go to again and again?
Yeah, I think it comes up a lot. Everyone's always like, "Oh, what's your deathbed meal?" It's always very like morose in terms of the conversation. Like you can only eat one, you're stranded on a desert island, all these terrible things that have to happen. Like it's always food related. Um, and for me, it's always been matzo ball soup. And I think the reason for that is so much of my childhood comfort food when I was sick, celebration, family time is rooted in flavors of Ashkenazi flavors, which is schmaltz, caramelized onions, a lot of these earthy, rich, umami packed things. Um, as we've continued our relationship, I think one of the beautiful things is kind of just building off and combining and finding the parallels. Perfect example of Zimas, really delicious, like Ashkenazi side of sweet carrots and prunes, and spiced with cinnamon. And you can find such similar combinations in Mizrahic dishes. There are Persian stews that are literally carrot and prune stew. They're literally, you think of like baharat, which is their Arabic spice blend of black pepper and cumin and coriander and cinnamon and all of these beautiful kind of combos of warm spices with more of those pungent ones. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, I have just found pleasure in that exploration of what we have in common and finding those parallels and finding ways that we can be making those mashups. It's something that's really fun because like I'm coming in as an outsider and I'm able to think about those flavors and these dishes much differently. Perfect example is tadik. So I one of the classic variations of the crispy Persian rice is you line the bottom of the pot with potatoes. And I do a variation in the book where I use sweet potato. It's not a genius revelation. It's like I swap potatoes for sweet potatoes. And yet all these Persians, when they see it, they're like, oh my God, I would have never thought of that. Why? Because you make it the way it's made because that's always how it's been made. And my husband's been able to do the same thing for me in the realm of Ashkenazi food. So I think that's been just a really big blessing.
I love that. I love the you're finding new flavors,
Exactly.
right? That we don't have to be, and it's a very rabbinic thing. I think part of their excitement when they get into an argument like that is like, what new crazy idea are you going to come up with that allows us to do things that we ourselves invented, right? The rabbis invented that you fast on Yom Kippur. That you won't find it anywhere in the Torah. They made it up, and then they proceeded to realize it wasn't working, and that if there's a sick person on Yom Kippur, you're going to feed that person. And I think that that the rabbis demonstrate for us over and over and over again, whether we're studying those books behind me or we're just feeling it out here like you are, of like, no, these rules were not invented, or these customs were not, we didn't arrive at these customs to imprison ourselves. We dealt with whatever we were dealing with, and if we had to innovate, we innovated. And maybe we're in a moment in Jewish history right now, and queer history for that matter, where we can innovate like in an anticipatory way.
Yeah.
And we don't always have to be in a reaction that allows for innovation, but we can actually be like, what if we expanded what we were doing right here and right now? And it seems to me like there's a lot of that in your approach.
I think that that's everything because to me, it's been what I have found the most grounding in terms of finding identity, finding connection, finding sustainability, and being able to really just like blend all these aspects of me that were typically compartmentalized. And I think of the way that I now practice and my rituals and I through during the pandemic did I start baking challah every Friday, and that's now become my Shabbat meditation. Every Friday morning, I make the dough. It's I think it's absolutely crucial that every Jew makes challah because I think it is something that everyone should know how to make. It's not that hard. It's a few ingredients, a bit of like elbow grease, and you're gonna have a beautiful dough. And I put on, like, for example, I don't go to shul, but every Friday morning I put on my favorite podcast, which is called The Study, and it's all about Torah portion going through the weekly parshat, but it's just in modern interpretations and conversations. And we think about like last week was Vayikra, which is all about kashrut law, and this one was talking about the conversation that many rabbis believe that all of those laws were put into place to actually reduce our meat consumption, not for a reason of like, this is how we have to eat meat and just do a lot of it. And I think we see the same thing with Passover. Jews love a loophole. We love a loophole. You think of so many Jews who like will eat bacon but no pork chops. They won't have shrimp, but if it's chopped up in dumplings and they're out, then it's okay. All these loopholes. And it's the same thing with kosher for Passover. It's like, oh well, no, I got the kosher for Passover baking powder, and I'm using the matzah cake meal, and I'm using this, I'm using that, and I'm doing it as much to make it seem like nothing's happening. And again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and what we're doing here and the sweetness. And I don't think that there needs to be like this really like harsh rules about it. But I do think that when we're focused so much on beating the system, it kind of defeats the point.
Yeah, that balance. There were a couple of questions, and I want to really encourage folks who have zoomed in and who are here with us tonight and have the opportunity to ask Jake any questions that you want to pop them in the chat, or if you're wildly waving and you want to be recognized that way, well, one of the folks who are writing the tech can call on you, but the chat is a great way to offer up your questions. There was a question earlier about it says, "Where was your mom a hidden child?" And they
My
went,
grandmother,
your
my
grandmother was
grandmother
in England.
in it was in Belgium. Belgium, yes. I had my great aunt was in Germany and had to go to and fled to London. But yeah, it's all part of the thing, part of the story. And I think that the hardest part was, and you hear different stories from different families of where like the parent, like I would say the first generation from survivors heard nothing, and then there are stories of like, well, they told everything to the grandkids. We heard nothing. We knew nothing about any of these things. I write about this in my great aunt Lottie's meringue cookies. Like I knew nothing about her history with the Holocaust until she passed at her funeral. And it's those things that are just like so unfortunate, because I think it's so important. And again, it's difficult. And I mean, the path of least resistance is always going to be taken. But it's sad when you just look at inherited trauma and this person doesn't talk to this person, and these people act crazy at these family seders, and it's always just put into the context of it is how it is, and not like, no, there's a reason. I have to remind my sister all the time because she gets angry at my grandmother about things. And it's just like, these are people that we just can't comprehend. We just can't comprehend. And you just have to move on from
Right.
that.
Yeah. I mean, we can't comprehend, and at the same time, we tell these stories over and over and over again, right? Another aspect of Passover is,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the one thing that they tell you in the Torah is like, eat matzah and tell this story. If you do that
Yep.
for me, I'll hang in there with you, right? There's a certain amount of that. Somebody is asking, from a presentation standpoint, what dish does Jake recommend? A traditional trifle or other? And this person, Ruth, is going to be making this for their Seder on Saturday, so they just would like to know what a
I
beautiful
love it.
putting it out is.
The trick is 2 quarts. This whole thing fills a 2 quart dish, whatever that shape may be. The best part about the matzah, you break it up, it can fit anything. Someone said you could do like individual mason jars or ramekins. They say you're doing something distant. Obviously, we're not doing a ton of big large share, everyone's sticking a spoon in the tiramisu kind of parties yet, but you can make it fit whatever. So I've done this is a pie dish. I have another one in a 8 by 10 baking dish. You could do it in a 9-inch square cake pan. If you had a beautiful trifle dish, that's obviously going to be the winner. But anything that you make it fit. Diana.
Nice. Thank you. Keep coming, folks. If you've got questions, this is a great time to send them in. You can either send them directly to me or just put them in the chat if you're comfortable with that.
And then, sorry for
Yeah, no,
this.
go for
So
it,
this
Jake.
is now assembled, beautiful. You need to cover it, pop it in your fridge for at least 4 hours to let the matzo soften, ideally overnight. This is a perfect dessert. You make it Friday, pop it in your fridge. It's ready for Saturday. Then you just have to top it with some powdered sugar. It's not baked. You don't bake tiramisu typically. This is so, you see, we did all of that. How amazing. How much should the matzah be? A little crispy or totally soggy? Somewhere in between. It shouldn't be falling apart. It could still have a little crisp to it. The main thing is it's going to continue to soak as it's layered. So it just needs to be, I say 30 seconds. A 30-second soak is perfect. It's not, and then you just, after it's chilled, dust on some powdered, some cocoa powder, and you're set.
Awesome. Um, can you see that one?
I'm planning on making this and a few other dishes for my boyfriend. I love that. And his family this weekend, trying to figure out how to explain matzah and gefilte fish. How do you go about introducing Gentiles to food that's completely foreign to them? I mean, at the end of the day, it's with complete pride and zero shame, in the same way that any person from any culture foreign from your own would describe their food. In terms of gefilte fish, it's like, yeah, I think there's this misconception based on the industrialization of food and jarred gefilte fish in the grocery store that's kind of disgusting, that gefilte fish is gross. But really, there's so many fish terrines in French cuisine served at 3 Michelin star restaurants that's deemed as fancy. Like, gefilte fish ain't that far from it if it's done well. So really, it's marketing. It's marketing. Same thing with matzah. I mean, yeah, it's matzah ain't so hot, but the point is it's not about the matzah, it's about the Seder, and explaining the Seder and this opportunity to discuss systems of oppression and the value of freedom. It's like, anyone who focuses on like, well, I just don't want to eat matzah, so I'm not going to Passover, they're not a good person, and you should cut them out of your life. Maybe not, but you get the drift.
Okay, while we're on cutting people out of their lives, and the challenges of certain foods during Passover, you and I share a fascination and love of Manischewitz.
Yes.
So I didn't want us to like miss the opportunity to like bring one of the stranger Jewish contributions to the culinary world. Why do you love it? No.
I mean, we're talking about the wine or just the brand?
The wine.
The wine. So the wine, because I mean, I'm not a big drinker. I love sweet things. To me, it's like you do a half glass of Manischewitz, half glass of seltzer. It's perfect. You have like, again, I don't drink regularly, so it's typically a bitters and soda moment. And like when the Manischewitz is there, that's the one time where I'm like, oh, this is delicious. This is just not that much further from Kedem grape juice, which is my second favorite beverage.
Yeah, it's just a sketch.
Just a sketch.
So as I told you, and when we met before, I do teachable moments through cocktails. So based on your tiramisu, I made the Sinai Sunrise that has a layer of Manischewitz in the bottom, and then this is an infused rum on top with grape juice. So I just wanted to raise a glass to you.
I love it.
And give you a big l'chaim. And
I'll use the whole bottle.
All right, perfect. All right.
L'chaim.
All right, brother. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
That's so crazy. You can actually get rum to taste like Manischewitz matzah. You've got Manischewitz matzah on top of Manischewitz wine.
Love it. Love it.
Somebody asked if your book is going to be making it to New Zealand. And
hopefully, yeah. I know I need to add a link. My editor, I know it's available in Australia, and I assume if it's available in Australia, it might be available in New Zealand. I don't know, but yes is the short answer. When, that's another thing. Everyone wants it now, and I get that.
This is actually my dear friend Leslie Frischman, who's zooming in from New Zealand, and said it's ordered.
It's ordered. Amazing.
All right, so Leslie, we're gonna have to trade notes on which recipes we liked. I wanted to also say that, in this program of saying that these are the 18 things that Jews who are 18 years old need to know, one of the things they included was making challah. So I think this is trending right for you, Jake. This is a good thing.
Yeah.
Really, really good thing. Awesome. Sweet. Oh, somebody says best event ever. Thank you, Larry Hanover.
Thank you.
That's Uncle Larry to me. So awesome. how's your mom doing with all of this fame and fortune that you were hopefully fortune that you're? I mean, this is like
Uh,
right, like this is another part of like the Jewish thing is the
the
son who
quelling,
makes
yeah,
good the
yeah,
quelling. How's that
yeah.
going?
Lots of crying. There was a lot of crying. Yeah, I mean, she's very proud. She's. I think everyone in both of our families is just so excited to see our recipes and our family celebrated. Every like head note in this book is a story. It's a story about my relationship, my family, my upbringing, my friends. It's such a personal book that everyone's just excited to see that. And I think that's one of the things I love about cookbooks versus just finding a recipe on the internet. And recipes are great on the internet. We're going to turn out wonderful. But I think when people read the book and they see the relationship of myself and my mother and the dynamics and bickering and this and that and how this person treats that person, and they're like, oh, that's just like my family. To me, that is the goal, because that's a deeper connection to understanding identity and how food plays such an important role in Judaism.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I'm glad. We're also so glad for you and so happy to be sharing in this with you. Thank you so much for gracing the JCC of San Francisco with this time and this, what looks like a really awesome, delicious recipe. Somebody mentioned, was questioning about chocolate, that they didn't notice any chocolate going in. And
And no chocolate goes into the
that's
tiramisu, just dipping the coffee and then cocoa powder on top. You could make a variation if you wanted to of making the sabayon mixture, mixing in some dark chocolate, stuff like that. Great, go wild. But traditionally, you won't find chocolate in the actual thing, just coffee.
awesome. I didn't want that to go by, and, we need to make sure that all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Love
Um,
it.
but thank you so much for this time with you, and we wish you the very very best, continued success with the book. And it takes a lot of guts to just keep telling your story over and over and over again. And I want to bless you. I just want to bless you with deeper understanding as that unfolds. Like that every time you tell some aspect of your story, something new about yourself, about your family, about your identity surfaces for you, and that you're just growing and growing and growing. As a geezer, I do a lot of work with folks in your demographic, and it's so exciting to see the kind of passion and engagement that you bring to the Jewish community right now. And God forbid that we should ever let it get stale, excuse the pun. Um, and you're not. And thank you. So may you go from strength to strength. And we're just so grateful to have shared this hour with you. Thank you so much, Jake.
Truly my pleasure. I had a great time chatting.